I poured my coffee slowly, letting the warmth seep into my hands while the rest of the apartment sat in shadow. Even in late autumn, Boston mornings carried a chill that clung to my bones, no matter how many layers I wore. Outside my window, city sounds drifted up, a distant siren, the soft grumble of early traffic, a dog barking at nothing in the alley below. It was a morning like any other, or so I thought. My phone buzzed, breaking the familiar hush, its vibration rattling against the worn table. When you live alone long enough, you learn not to expect surprises. Most texts I got were spam or appointment reminders, nothing that deserved a second glance. But when I picked up my phone and saw the name Mrs. Langford, a jolt ran through me. That name belonged to a part of my life I'd folded up and hidden away years ago. Mrs. Langford, our old neighbor, the one with the garden full of peonies and the nosy curiosity that kept her tuned to every family's secrets on the block. I hadn't spoken to her since I'd left home. Seeing her name felt like the past had found my unlisted number. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, reluctant to open the message. What could she possibly want? The message was brief, a video file and a single line, no greeting, no context, just, "I'm so sorry about your parents. I can't believe what I saw today." My heartbeat quickened, dread slithered under my ribs. I told myself it was probably some misunderstanding, a neighborly mistake. But curiosity and a strange sense of duty won out. I set my coffee aside and tapped the video. The screen filled with the interior of St. James's Church, a place I hadn't thought about in years. Memories of Christmas Eve services and sunlight through stained glass flickered in the back of my mind. But this wasn't a holiday. The pews were full of mourners dressed in black, faces I recognized and others I didn't, all huddled in grief. My breath caught as the camera slowly panned to the front. There, at the altar, stood my parents. My mother in black lace, clutching a handkerchief, her eyes red and shining with tears, my father, tall and stiff, reading from a sheet of paper that trembled slightly in his grip. Behind them stood a casket covered in lilies and white roses. At its head, perched on an easel, was a framed photograph of me. I leaned in, squinting at the image. It was my old college portrait, the one my mother insisted on taking in the backyard, before things fell apart. I saw my own smiling face, encircled by flowers, watching over the ceremony like a ghost. I barely heard my father's words at first. The church's acoustics made everything sound distant, a little hollow, as if the video was tunneling in from another reality. "She was always a troubled girl," he read, his voice thick with practiced sorrow. "But we loved her, and we did everything we could." My vision blurred as I listened. Was this some cruel joke? My mother dabbed her eyes, her sobs so perfect I wondered if she'd rehearsed them in front of a mirror. The camera trembled, catching the faces of aunts, cousins, even my old piano teacher, all nodding in sympathy. A heaviness pressed into my chest. I paused the video, letting the silence settle. I felt cold, colder than the draft sneaking under the apartment door. My hands were trembling, coffee forgotten and cooling on the table. I pressed play again, needing to be sure. My father continued, "Though she left this world far too young, we pray her soul finally finds peace." I wanted to laugh, but the sound stuck in my throat. I was alive, very much alive, but there they were, burying me in every way that counted. There was a strange kind of pain in watching your own funeral. It wasn't just that my parents had declared me dead, it was how convincingly they'd performed their grief. As if I'd never existed, except as a cautionary tale. I watched the mourners file past the casket, some laying flowers, others whispering condolences to my mother. Not one of them had called me, texted, even wondered where I was. It was as if I'd been erased, not just from my family, but from the world. An old memory tugged at me, my father lifting me onto his shoulders after church one Easter, the way my mother used to press cold hands to my forehead when I was sick. I clung to those scraps of tenderness, but they slipped away, replaced by the image of my own face surrounded by lilies. I paused the video again, jaw clenched. A question pounded in my head, insistent and sharp: why would they do this? What are they hiding? For a moment, I wanted to call Mrs. Langford, to ask if she'd made a mistake, but I knew she hadn't. The proof was there in pixels and sorrow. I had always believed that family meant protection, a place to come home to. But sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who bury you deepest. The room felt smaller. I wrapped my hands around my mug, hoping for comfort, but the coffee was already cold. As I stared at my reflection in the dark window, I realized I was looking at someone who no longer existed, not in their world, anyway. If there's one thing life has taught me, it's that silence can be more final than any goodbye. I sat there, shivering, while the city outside carried on, not knowing that in a single morning, I had become both the mourner and the mourned. And as the first sunlight slipped over the rooftops, I knew nothing about this day would ever be ordinary again. I must have watched that funeral video a dozen times, eyes burning, until the coffee beside me turned cold and stale. Each time I pressed play, I half hoped the ending would be different, that I'd catch some clue in the flicker of my mother's hand or the set of my father's jaw that would make sense of it all. But the facts were as unyielding as stone. My family had declared me dead, and the world believed them. The only thing left behind was me, real, breathing, shivering in a kitchen that had never felt lonelier. They say when you lose someone, the world becomes quieter. But when you are the one who's been lost, it's the silence inside you that's deafening. I closed my laptop, pushing it away like it was hot to the touch. I leaned back in my chair, letting the early light slip through my window blinds. It cast stripes across my arms, light and dark, past and present. Sometimes pain works that way, sneaking up on you in patches, never quite letting you go. That morning, it dragged me back 3 years, to the night everything fell apart. The memory surfaced uninvited. Our house on Hawthorne Street had always smelled faintly of lemon polish and the dinner my mother was stewing on the stove. I could still picture the sunlight hitting the family photos in the hallway, dust motes drifting in the golden beams. But that night, the warmth was gone, everything in the kitchen felt sharp and cold, as if even the walls were waiting for someone to break. Emily sat at the table, arms folded, eyes red but defiant. My mother stood by the sink, back ramrod straight, hands clenched around a dish towel. My father paced near the fridge, the family checkbook splayed open on the counter. "I told you, I don't know how the numbers came up short," I said, voice hoarse, nearly pleading. "There's a mistake. I can help you find it." My father shook his head, face gray with disappointment. "It's $80,000, Rachel. That's not a small mistake. You were the one in charge of the books. Who else would have done it?" I looked at Emily, searching her face for any sign of the sister I used to know. She stared at the floor, lips pressed tight, refusing to meet my eyes. I remembered her laugh as a child, the way she used to follow me everywhere, shadow and sunlight, always together. Now she sat silent, a stone in my shoe. My mother's voice sliced through the tension, soft but cold. "You've always been the restless one, Rachel. Always wanted more. We tried to help you, but look where that's gotten us." I tried to speak, to defend myself, but words caught like thorns in my throat. How do you fight for yourself when your family has already handed down your sentence? I could see the fear in my mother's eyes, not fear for me, but for the gossip that would sweep through the neighborhood, for the shame that would stain her careful world. The room spun, thick with the sour smell of anxiety and old lemon polish. I reached for Emily, my voice shaking. Emily, please, tell them. I know you borrowed money. Just tell the truth. She flinched, but my father stepped between us. That's enough. Don't drag your sister into this. She's not the one who failed us. That was the moment I knew the verdict had been decided long before I walked into the kitchen. My innocence meant less to them than the story they needed to tell themselves. The need to believe in a perfect daughter and a perfect home. I remember the words that ended it, as clearly as if my mother were whispering them in my ear now. She looked at me, voice trembling with controlled pain, better one ruined daughter than two. That sentence slammed the door on my childhood, on every hope of going back. I left that night with a suitcase that barely zipped and a phone full of numbers I thought belonged to people who loved me. I called, I texted. Sometimes I left long voicemails, apologies, explanations, pleas for someone to just listen. Each time, the line rang out or went straight to voicemail. Eventually, my number was blocked, my messages left unread. My old friends from college, even neighbors who had known me since grade school, stopped replying. My world shrank, room by room, until I found myself standing in an apartment that echoed with nothing but my own heartbeat. I tried to make sense of it, but there was nothing to grab hold of. Some families fall apart with shouts and slammed doors, but mine broke in silence. A cold exile, a steady shutting of doors. Grief, I learned, isn't just for the dead. It's for the living left behind, for the daughters erased from every story told at Thanksgiving. I looked around my apartment, the peeling linoleum, the thrift store chair, the single photo on the fridge, me and Emily at the zoo, 5 and 8 years old, arms thrown around each other's shoulders. I hadn't had the heart to take it down. Maybe some part of me still believed she'd call, that she'd break under the weight of truth and reach out. But the phone never rang. Loneliness became its own kind of habit, a shadow I learned to live with. I think about the old sayings people share when things fall apart. Blood is thicker than water, or you can always come home. But I know now that some bridges are burned from both ends, and you can't walk back if no one wants you to return. Sometimes, the people who promise to stand by you are the first to let go. My hands ached, still gripping my mug as if I could squeeze warmth from cold ceramic. Outside, the city was waking up, the world moving on as if nothing had changed. I watched the sun creep higher, feeling the distance grow between me and everyone I'd ever known. There's a kind of silence that comes after exile, a quiet so deep it makes you question if you were ever real at all. As I sat alone, the last line my mother spoke replayed in my mind, echoing through the empty room. I realized that, somewhere along the way, I had stopped being a daughter and started becoming a ghost. And that, I thought, was the cruelest trick of all, not just being cast out, but being forgotten by the ones you once called home. I thought exile was the end. I really did. But, as it turned out, my family had other plans, plans that ran deeper than silence, sharper than any goodbye. I learned, in the dark stillness of my apartment, that being shut out was only the beginning. There are cruelties quieter than anger, betrayals colder than slammed doors. Some families forget you, mine tried to erase me. It started small, as so many reckonings do. Late at night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through old memories, photos on my phone, emails saved from brighter days, fragments of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I remembered laughter at birthday dinners, Emily's voice shrieking with delight as we blew out candles, my father snapping pictures no one ever printed. That past felt distant, like a dream left behind on a train. Out of habit, I tried to log into my old email account, the one I'd stopped using after I left. I typed in my password, fingers moving on autopilot. Instead of the usual error, a red banner flashed across the screen, account disabled. User deceased. For a second, I thought it was some technical glitch. I tried again, and again. Each time, the word stared back at me, final as a tombstone. Dead. I sat back, blinking at the screen. It was so absurd I almost laughed. I picked up my phone, called the customer support number listed on the website, and waited. The hold music was tinny and bright, a strange soundtrack for the unraveling of a person. Finally, a voice came on the line, cheerful, unbothered by the late hour. "Thank you for calling. How can I help you tonight?" "I'm having trouble accessing my email," I said, forcing my voice to sound normal. "It says the account is disabled because I'm deceased?" There was a pause. I could imagine the support agent frowning at her monitor, trying to figure out if this was a prank. "I'm sorry to hear that," she replied, with practiced sympathy. "Can you verify your identity?" I rattled off my name, birthday, mother's maiden name, details that felt both intimate and impossibly distant. The agent put me on hold again. When she returned, her tone was gentle, careful. "Our records show a report of user deceased filed about a year ago. We received official documentation, which is why the account was closed." My mouth went dry. "What documentation?" "I'm not at liberty to say, ma'am, but I can tell you the report included a death certificate. Cause of death, road accident overseas." I felt the room tilt. I hadn't owned a car in years. The absurdity of it buzzed in my ears, louder than the city traffic outside. "Can I see the documentation?" "I'm afraid you'll have to contact the Public Records Office for that." The call ended, and I was left in the half-dark, staring at the blue glow of my laptop. I could see my reflection in the black screen, tired eyes, tangled hair, a frown that felt carved into my face. There was something both horrifying and strangely comic about the situation. Here I was, breathing, panicking, clutching my coffee mug for comfort, and somewhere out there, the world had paperwork proving I was dead. If there's one thing living alone teaches you, it's to solve your own mysteries. I pulled up the Public Records website, heart pounding, and began the process of requesting my own death certificate. It felt ridiculous, almost theatrical. When the PDF arrived, I opened it with shaking hands. There it was, in plain, bureaucratic language, Rachel Carter. Date of death, July 16, 2022. Cause, motor vehicle accident, international. Status, deceased. Certificate ID, MA0218F. I ran my finger over the details. My birth date. My middle name, spelled just the way my mother always insisted. The signature at the bottom looked official, governmental stamps and all. I felt a hollow laugh rise in my throat. Apparently, I had died without ever noticing. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it all settling over me like dust. There was a sick genius in what my family had done. It wasn't enough to exile me, they had scrubbed me from existence itself, wiped the slate so clean that even the internet believed I'd vanished. In the modern world, being dead on paper is as final as any coffin. For a long moment, I just sat there, clutching the mouse as if it could ground me in reality. I thought about the absurdity, how I could pay rent, buy groceries, walk the city streets, and yet, officially, I was no one. It made me want to laugh and cry all at once. I was a ghost in my own life. Flashes of memory flickered, a birthday party when I was 12, the warm clatter of dishes, my mother humming as she frosted a cake. All of it felt like someone else's life, blurred by the passing years. I wondered if my parents remembered those moments, or if they'd buried them alongside me. A phrase floated up, something my grandfather used to say, "In America, if it's not on paper, it doesn't exist." He meant it about business deals, wills, the big things in life. I never thought it would apply to my own heartbeat. Determination slowly seeped in where panic had been. If they could kill me on paper, I could fight to come back. I pulled open every drawer, found my passport, work contracts, tax filings, anything that proved I was alive. I snapped photos of every document, saving them in a new folder. I wasn't sure yet what I would do, but I refused to be erased. The world might not remember me, but I was still here. The hour grew late. Neon from the city painted blue streaks on the ceiling. I sat at my desk, exhausted, holding my own resurrection in a handful of papers. I thought about the cost of being forgotten, the slow, bitter ache of losing not just family but the right to your own story. And as I closed my laptop, the final question echoed in the quiet: what else did they take from me? If my family wanted me dead on paper, what did they do with my life? That question haunted me for days, echoing in the corners of my apartment like the tick of a clock I couldn't turn off. After the shock of discovering my own death certificate, I wandered from room to room, unable to settle. I found myself pausing in front of the little shelf by my kitchen window where I kept old photographs, a faded picture of me and Emily in matching holiday sweaters, a family picnic, Dad with his hand resting heavy on my shoulder. Above the frame, I could almost hear his voice again: family always comes first. I'd grown up believing it, clinging to the idea even as the evidence unraveled around me. On a brisk Thursday morning, with sunlight angling in through the blinds, I sat down at my laptop with a fresh cup of coffee and a notepad, determined to find out exactly what I'd lost. In America, if something exists, it leaves a trail: paper, pixels, account numbers, the bureaucratic breadcrumbs of a life. I was going to follow them. First, I logged into my old bank account, half expecting another error message, but my credentials still worked. The balance was zero, of course, but the transaction history told a longer story. Tuition payments from the Carter Family Trust, regular deposits for college expenses, all of it neat and predictable, until 2 years ago, when everything went blank. There was a lump sum transfer, a notation I didn't recognize, and then silence. I checked the family business registry online, digging through public records, trying not to flinch at every official use of my name. The Carter and Carter ledger showed my shares had been reassigned 6 months after my death, the ink on my digital obituary barely dry. I jotted down registration numbers and dates, piecing the puzzle together. It was as if someone had swept the floor clean after a party, no sign I'd ever been invited. Social media was its own kind of purgatory. I hadn't looked up Emily in over a year, but curiosity pushed me onto her Instagram. Her account was public now, a glossy window into a life I no longer recognized. I scrolled past photos of rooftop brunches, champagne toasts, and weekend getaways with her new husband. There were close-ups of designer shoes, sparkling engagement rings, and bouquets bigger than my first apartment. The caption under a shot of her laughing with friends read, "New beginnings, new blessings." Not one mention of me, not a birthday, not a holiday, not a single photo from the time when we'd been inseparable. It was the wedding photos that hit hardest. Emily glowed in a white dress, my mother dabbing her eyes in the front row, Dad beaming with pride. I stopped at a picture of the reception, champagne glasses raised high. My father stood at the head table, giving a toast. I could almost hear his voice through the screen, warm, confident, utterly convinced. The caption, "To the one daughter who always made us proud." The words bit deeper than any accusation. I wasn't just gone, I'd been replaced. I closed my eyes, remembering how Dad used to call us his girls, lining us up for photos in front of the old maple tree every fall. How quickly a memory turns cold. I picked up the phone and dialed the city records office, palms damp with nerves. The woman who answered was brisk but polite, asking for my information as if I were another piece of paperwork to be filed. I explained, carefully, that I needed to verify a transfer of trust funds. Date of death, she asked, voice steady, fingers clicking across her keyboard. I'm not dead, I said, my words spilling out before I could stop them. There's been a mistake. A brief pause. I see here, Rachel Carter, trust fund, reassigned to Emily Carter. All documentation is in order, effective as of last year. The line went quiet. I thanked her, numbly, and hung up. So that was it, every penny, every promise meant to help me start a life, now belonged to my sister. On paper, it was all perfectly legal. I wandered back to the window, tracing the outline of the city skyline with my finger. The world outside was busy, commuters, school buses, people with places to be. I felt small, weightless, as if I'd slipped out of my own story. In this country, money means belonging, it's the key to homes, education, security, even dignity. My family hadn't just written me off emotionally, they'd made sure I had nothing to come back to. I scrolled once more through Emily's feed, stopping at a photo of her and Dad, arms around each other, both laughing under a swirl of confetti. The caption was simple, family first. I let out a breathless laugh. It sounded like a punchline to a joke only they understood. My heart thudded, equal parts grief and anger. How easy it was for them to move on, to redistribute my inheritance as if I'd never existed. They wanted a world where I was invisible, and they'd built it, brick by bureaucratic brick. But I wasn't gone, not really. There's a saying I once heard from a neighbor, you can't keep the sun from rising, no matter how tightly you close the blinds. Maybe my family thought they could shut me out forever, but the truth has a way of leaking in, slow and persistent. I set my coffee down, hands steady for the first time in weeks. If they wanted me gone, they were about to see just how alive I really was. The only way to fight back was to prove I was alive. It sounded simple enough, but the more I thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. In America, people believe what's written down. Paperwork is gospel. If the records say you're dead, you might as well be, unless you can stack up enough evidence to outshout the silence. That morning, sunlight pooled across my kitchen table as I stared at the little pile of documents I'd gathered, my battered passport, lease agreements, tax returns, utility bills, bits of my life that refused to disappear, even when my family wished I would. I still didn't know what I was looking for, only that I couldn't bear being erased without a fight. My phone buzzed, jolting me from my thoughts. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years, Sam Whitaker, my mother's nephew, technically my cousin, but more like a little brother growing up. My hand shook as I tapped to open the message. Rachel, is that really you? I blinked, relief and dread tangling in my chest. Sam had been quiet ever since the night everything fell apart, swept along by family loyalties I could hardly blame him for. But his message, hesitant, uncertain, felt like a hand reaching out from the dark. It's me, I typed back. I need your help. He responded in minutes, his disbelief melting into concern. He hadn't heard from my parents in weeks, but he'd caught wind of the accident, the story they'd spun about my death. He apologized for not believing it, for letting the silence grow between us. You were always the strong one, he wrote. I should have reached out sooner. I asked if we could meet. We settled on a small coffee shop near Sam's apartment, the kind with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. I got there early, hands wrapped around a paper cup, watching the city move outside the window. When Sam arrived, he looked older, hair longer, eyes tired but kind. He hesitated before sitting, searching my face for some sign of the cousin he'd once known. I honestly thought I'd never see you again, he said quietly. Me too, I admitted, managing a weak smile. We talked for an hour, voices low, sharing details of lost time. I told him about the funeral video, the death certificate, my erasure. He listened without flinching, anger simmering in his jaw. This isn't right, he said, hands curled into fists. You deserve better. He encouraged me to find a lawyer, someone who could take on the impossible. There has to be a way back, he said, squeezing my hand. You can't let them win. Sam's hope was contagious. I went home that afternoon and searched for legal help, sifting through reviews and websites until one name kept popping up, Michael Kim, an attorney known for handling tough, unusual cases. I left a message, not expecting much. To my surprise, he called back the next morning. His voice was brisk but not unfriendly. Rachel Carter? I understand you have an unusual situation. Why don't you come in and tell me everything? His office was downtown, tucked between a florist and a bakery that filled the air with the scent of fresh bread. I arrived early, clutching a file folder bulging with documents. Michael was younger than I expected, maybe in his 30s, sharp suit, dark hair pulled back, glasses perched on his nose. He gestured for me to sit, then folded his hands on the desk. Let's start from the beginning, he said. I walked him through the story, from the family argument to the funeral video to the legal erasure. I laid out every document, every email, every scrap of evidence. At first, he nodded politely, taking notes, but as the story deepened, his expression shifted. He scrolled through the photos on my phone, checked the stamps in my passport, read the city records and death certificate I'd printed out. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, silent for a long minute. You understand how rare this is, right? He said. Most people don't come back from the dead, legally or otherwise. I forced a smile. Guess I've always liked doing things the hard way. He smiled too, the first real crack in his professional armor. Your evidence is strong, he said. If we can show continuous proof of life, challenge the death certificate, and establish intent to defraud, you might just have a case. Something in his voice steadied me. For the first time in months, I felt seen, not as a ghost or a problem, but as a person worth fighting for. He gathered my documents into a tidy stack. I'll start with a motion to revoke the declaration of death, then file a fraud complaint against the parties involved. It won't be easy, and it may take time. Are you ready for this? I nodded, feeling the tension lift from my shoulders. I have to be. Michael glanced at his calendar, then at me. By the way, did you know there's a memorial for you this Sunday at St. James's? The words hit like a splash of cold water. What? He nodded, flipping his laptop around to show a church bulletin online. Your parents are hosting it. Public service, open to the community. I stared at the screen, mind racing. Part of me wanted to disappear, to hide from the spectacle. But another part, the part that refused to die quietly, felt a new spark of determination. Maybe it was time to let the world know I was still here. You ready for your own resurrection? Michael asked, a lopsided grin on his face as he slid a thick stack of forms across the desk. For a moment, I almost laughed, almost. But the tension twisting in my stomach made it hard to do anything but stare at the papers, as if they held the secret to breathing again. In a way, they did. His office was quiet, the air tinged with the scent of printer ink and the muffled hum of city life just outside the window. I picked up a pen, my fingers trembling slightly, and began to sign. Each stroke felt like another brick in a bridge back to the world, a world that had left me for dead, but wasn't quite rid of me yet. Michael explained every page patiently. This is the motion to revoke your death certificate. This one initiates the fraud investigation. These give me power of attorney if things get complicated." He glanced at me, searching for fear or regret, but I just nodded and kept writing. In my mind, I was already rehearsing the day to come. "It's going to get messy," he warned. "There may be reporters, maybe even people who don't believe you. Are you sure you're up for that?" I paused, letting the question settle. The truth was, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. But when you've spent years living in someone else's version of your life, sometimes the only way out is to step into the light, ready or not. "I don't want to hide anymore," I said softly. "Even if it hurts." He nodded, almost approving. "That's the spirit. Sometimes, facing the world is the bravest thing we do." Later that afternoon, I walked home beneath an iron-gray sky. The city moved around me, oblivious, office workers hurrying past, a mother steering her child through puddles, the golden glow of a bakery window. I drifted through the crowd, both visible and invisible, caught between two realities. Every so often, I caught my reflection in a shopfront, half expecting not to see myself at all. Back at my apartment, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the world grow dim and soft around the edges. The paperwork was finished, stacked in neat piles on the counter, but my thoughts churned. I kept circling back to St. James's, that old church on the corner, where so much of my childhood had unfolded, Christmas services, candlelit vigils, the hush before the organ sang out. I could picture the stained glass windows, washed in color and memory, and hear my father's voice echoing through the nave. It was strange, thinking about returning there, this time not as a daughter in a pew, but as a ghost refusing to stay buried. That night, sleep came in fits and starts. I woke before dawn, nerves buzzing, and dressed in dark clothes. My breath fogged in the cold as I slipped through the city, heading toward the church. The streets were mostly empty, a few joggers, a delivery truck, the faint chime of a streetcar somewhere in the distance. I walked slower as St. James's came into view, its stone facade looming pale against the morning. I stood across the street, hidden in the shadows of an old sycamore, watching volunteers file in and out with boxes of flowers and candles. Through the open doors, I could see the familiar glow of stained glass spilling color across the worn floorboards. It looked just as I remembered, and yet utterly transformed. A banner was being hung above the entrance, "Memorial Service for Rachel Carter." My own name, bold and final, for the whole world to see. I felt a chill, not from the weather but from the surreal weight of it all. As I watched, my mind drifted to Christmases long ago, the hush before the choir began, the way the light caught in Emily's hair, my mother's soft humming beside me. For a moment, I let myself miss it, the old certainties, the belief that family would always be there, no matter what. But those certainties were gone, replaced by a sharp, necessary clarity. Inside, I saw my parents talking with the pastor, their faces solemn and carefully arranged for sympathy. Emily stood nearby, her expression pinched, glancing anxiously at the programs being stacked on a table. I wondered what stories they'd tell the congregation, how they would spin my absence into a tragedy, how they would bask in the gentle glow of other people's pity. I wanted to rage, to run in and demand answers, but I stayed put, shrouded in the anonymity of early morning. Instead, I took in every detail, the careful staging, the rehearsed grief, the show of loss that would soon become their shield. I realized then that this wasn't just about me, or even about them. It was about truth, and the ways we carve our own place in the world, even when others try to write us out. As the sun climbed higher, the city woke around me. Car horns sounded, shop doors opened, the pace of life quickened. I felt the pulse of it, life moving forward, unstoppable. Something in me steadied, a thread of courage weaving through the fear. I stepped out from the shadows, letting the morning light wash over me. This time I wouldn't turn away. My story was unfinished, and for once, I had the pen. That evening, as I packed my bag and laid out my documents, I caught my reflection one last time, older, yes, but still standing. If I'd learned anything in the past year, it was that you can't be erased as long as you're willing to speak. This Sunday, I whispered to the empty room, the truth will finally have its day. And with that promise, I felt something new stir within me, a sense of rebirth, the possibility of reckoning, and the faintest hope that even the lost can find their way back. Sunday morning dawned bright and cold, the kind of day that makes the air shimmer, the kind that settles in your bones and won't let go. For a moment, as I stood by the window, I watched sunlight flicker across the frosted glass, painting pale lines across my bedroom floor. Somewhere down on the street, a horn sounded, and the city slowly began to wake. I sipped my coffee and tried to steady my hands, but the cup rattled against the saucer anyway. If you ever come back, make it count, Sam had said just a few nights before. His words echoed in my mind now, bracing as the wind. I pulled out my dress, black, simple, the kind I never thought I'd wear for my own memorial. The fabric felt heavier than it should, but I slipped it on, careful to smooth every wrinkle, combing my hair back from my face with fingers that trembled just a little. My phone buzzed, and I grabbed it like a lifeline. It was Michael. "You okay?" I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "As okay as I'll ever be. On my way soon." He replied instantly, "I'll be outside if you need anything. Remember, the evidence is on your side. Just breathe. This is your moment." I nodded to myself, walking through the motions, gathering my folder of documents, checking my ID twice, slipping on a pair of gloves against the cold. As I stepped into the hallway, the world felt muted, as if someone had pressed a pillow over the city's face. Every footstep echoed. I caught my reflection in the building's cracked elevator mirror, pale, determined, something new in my eyes I didn't recognize. The cab ride was short and silent. I watched the buildings flash by, the river silver in the morning sun, the park still and empty. My thoughts wandered to holidays at St. James's, candlelight flickering over polished pews, Emily's laughter ringing down the nave, the smell of cinnamon and pine in December air. Those memories felt close enough to touch, but also impossibly far away. When we reached the church, I asked the driver to let me out a block early. I needed the time, the walk, the chance to collect myself before the final act. The street was already lined with cars, mourners filing toward the great wooden doors in clusters of black. I kept to the far side, eyes down, watching boots scuff across the icy sidewalk. From across the street, I could see them all, faces from old photo albums, neighbors who once pressed Christmas cookies into my palm, distant cousins whose names I barely remembered. My parents were there, standing together at the steps, my mother's arm linked through my father's. She looked smaller than I remembered, but her posture was stiff and dignified. Dad looked distracted, his eyes darting between arriving guests and the church doors, a nervous host welcoming guests to a haunted house. I wondered if they felt guilt. If they ever woke in the night and missed me, even for a second. But then Emily appeared, her coat buttoned tight, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. She stood apart, glancing at her phone, never quite meeting anyone's gaze. I ducked behind a tree, breath fogging in the cold. A memory surfaced, Emily and I as children, chasing each other around the churchyard, our laughter echoing in the crisp winter air. Back then, I thought nothing could come between us. I closed my eyes, feeling the ache of it, the weight of all we'd lost. My phone vibrated again, Michael this time, voice urgent on the line. "I see you," he said quietly. "Take your time. I'll be near the entrance if you need backup." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Thank you," I whispered. "For believing me. You don't have to do it alone, Rachel, he replied. Whatever happens, you're not invisible anymore. As the church bells began to toll, a flock of birds startled from the steeple, swirling against the blue sky. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. I watched as the doors opened wide, the crowd moving inside. The world seemed to hush, as if holding its breath for what was about to come. I steadied myself, counting each breath. In. Out. In. Out. I rehearsed my lines in my head, what I'd say, how I'd show them the proof, how I'd look my father in the eye and not flinch. I imagined Emily's face when she saw me, wondered if she'd run or reach for me, if either of us could forgive. My hands shook, so I gripped the folder tighter, drawing strength from its weight. If years of loneliness had taught me anything, it was that survival sometimes means standing up in front of the world, refusing to disappear. I'd been a ghost long enough. The bells rang out, a low and mournful song that carried over the rooftops. I looked at the church, its stained glass windows glowing gold and red in the sun. I remembered sitting there as a little girl, believing in miracles, trusting that family was forever. I pressed my lips together, wiped a tear from my cheek, and squared my shoulders. Whatever happened inside, I was done hiding. I watched my own face surrounded by lilies, a portrait framed by loss and lies. For a moment, I simply stood just inside the narthex, shielded by a heavy pillar, breath shallow, heart jackhammering against my ribs. The scent of flowers was everywhere, lilies and roses and a spray of baby's breath that clung to the winter air, thick and almost suffocating. The hush inside St. James's pressed in close, punctuated by the soft rustle of coat sleeves, the faint scuff of shoes across cold marble. The last time I stood in this church, it was Christmas Eve, and I was a child. I remembered the glow of candlelight, the echo of carols, Emily giggling beside me as we tried to catch melting wax on our fingertips. The nave had seemed enormous then, impossibly grand, a place where miracles could happen. Today, every pew was filled, but the room felt shrunken, the stained glass dulled by clouds. I pulled my scarf up, half hiding my face, and moved quietly into a back pew. My hands trembled as I clutched my folder of documents, knuckles white against the soft black wool of my gloves. I tried to make myself invisible, shrinking into the shadows, eyes flitting across the congregation. So many faces I recognized, distant relatives, neighbors from Hawthorne Street, Mrs. Langford in her best blue hat, even Sam, his head bowed, jaw tight. No one noticed me slip in. All eyes were fixed on the front, where the altar was draped in white and my photograph, college graduation, sunlight on my hair, rested on an easel surrounded by flowers. I stared at that image for a long time, feeling oddly detached, as if I were watching someone else's tragedy. My mother sat in the front row, draped in black, a tissue pressed to her lips. Her shoulders shook with perfectly timed sobs, mascara painting shadows beneath her eyes. Beside her, my father stood at the lectern, hands gripping a folded piece of paper. He cleared his throat, his voice wavering in just the right way. She was always a bright soul, he read, pausing for effect. Troubled at times, yes, but she brought us joy. We prayed every day for her happiness, and now we pray for her peace. A murmur of agreement rippled through the pews. I watched Emily rise to speak, her face pale and drawn, lips pressed into a trembling line. She held her speech with both hands, knuckles white, and I could see the nerves, real or rehearsed, I couldn't tell. My sister was complicated, Emily said, voice cracking. But she was mine. I wish I'd had a chance to say goodbye. Something in me tightened. I watched her clutch a strand of pearls, eyes glistening as she dabbed her cheek with the back of her hand. The performance was flawless, grief, regret, a sister's ache. The crowd ate it up. In another life, I might have believed her. I scanned the faces around me, searching for disbelief, doubt, a flicker of suspicion. But there was none. Friends and relatives comforted each other, exchanging soft words of sorrow, squeezing hands, shaking their heads. I caught snippets of conversation as I moved closer. How sad, how sudden, how tragic. Not one person questioned the story. I was gone, and everyone accepted it. As the service wore on, the air seemed to grow heavier, the scent of lilies sinking deeper into my lungs. I tried to anchor myself in small details, the way sunlight slanted through the stained glass, painting the stone floor in fractured blues and reds, the faint squeak of the church door, the taste of old fears rising in the back of my throat. The priest took the pulpit, face solemn, hands raised in a gesture of blessing. "Let us stand for a moment of silence," he intoned, voice echoing high in the rafters. "Let us honor Rachel's memory, and pray for the peace of those she leaves behind." I stood, every muscle taut, the folder of documents pressed tight against my side. I watched my parents bow their heads, saw Emily's shoulders slump, the whole congregation folding in on itself, waiting for some sign. In that hush, time seemed to pause, the only sound my own heartbeat, loud in my ears. It would be so easy to turn and leave, to slip back into the city and disappear for good. I could live out my days as a ghost, unseen, untouched, the story everyone whispered but no one believed. But something in me rebelled against that fate. I remembered Christmases in this church, the belief that light could pierce any darkness, that the truth, no matter how painful, was always worth speaking. I took a breath, steadying myself, feeling the tremor in my hands fade into something harder, stronger. And then, as the silence deepened, I stepped into the light. The silence shattered as the doors slammed open behind them. Heads turned, gasps sucked the breath out of the room, and in that heartbeat of chaos, every sound seemed to echo off the cold marble walls of St. James's. Light from the street poured in, sharp and white, cutting across the gloom like a stage spotlight. I stood in the doorway for a moment, pulse pounding, the folder of documents gripped so tightly in my hand my knuckles blanched. For a split second, nobody moved. It was as if the whole world was suspended on the tip of a pin. I took a single step forward, the click of my heel ricocheting down the aisle. Murmurs erupted, spreading like ripples through water. Faces turned, whispers blooming, first confusion, then disbelief, then fear. I met Mrs. Langford's gaze. She blinked once, mouth open, her blue hat trembling ever so slightly. Sam's face was white as chalk, his hands frozen mid-prayer. I walked on, every stride deliberate, the church filling with the low hum of rising panic. Is that? No. It can't be. She's supposed to be, a little boy in the second pew pointed. Mom, that's her. That's Rachel. At the front of the church, my mother's hand fluttered to her chest. Her face drained of color, her knees buckled, and she collapsed in a swirl of black lace. My father lunged to catch her but was too slow. She hit the pew with a faint thud, the sound muffled by flowers. He stood frozen, one hand still outstretched, his eyes locked on mine. Emily stared at me as if she'd seen a ghost, her pearls clutched so tight I could see the tendons in her neck strain. Her mouth worked silently, no words coming out. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the whisper surged, a tidal wave, alive? Is it really her? What's happening? I kept moving, the folder pressed to my side, my breath shallow but steady. The hush inside the church was electric, crackling with confusion, fear, and the sudden, collective sense that the script had been torn up in front of them all. I reached the altar, turning to face the crowd. My photo loomed over my shoulder, the lilies at my feet still fragrant and pale. I caught my father's eye, his face stiff, lips pressed into a thin line, jaw set in that old, familiar way. I remembered his words from years ago, cold as winter, nothing can shame this family. I almost smiled at the irony. I drew in a slow breath, grounding myself. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, my voice trembling but clear. But I'm not dead. And I need everyone to hear the truth. A gasp rippled through the congregation. Some people rose to their feet, others shrank into the pews, as if hoping to disappear. Phones appeared, some discreet, some bold, red lights blinking, recording every word, every movement. I know what this looks like, I continued, raising my voice as firmly as I could. But I'm not a ghost. I am very much alive. I didn't die in a car accident. There was no tragedy in Europe. I've been here, living, breathing, working. My family, I paused, glancing at my father, at Emily, at the still unconscious shape of my mother. My family told you all I was gone, but it wasn't true. They filed a false death certificate. They erased me, not for my sake, but for their own convenience. I opened the folder, pulling out document after document, my passport, my lease, tax forms, dated photos. I held them high for all to see, hands shaking only a little. I have proof. Official records, travel stamps, employment contracts. My life, in black and white. Everything you need to know that I'm real. The priest stepped back, eyes wide, hands raised in uncertainty. Mrs. Langford burst into tears. Sam looked at me, hope flickering across his face, then anger, then something like relief. Emily finally found her voice, whispering, "Rachel?" It came out so small, I barely heard it. I turned to my father, feeling years of grief and longing twist into something sharp but necessary. You didn't lose a daughter, I said, each word slow, deliberate. You threw her away. And now you get to watch her walk back in. My mother stirred, a soft moan, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked up at me, confusion and terror battling in her face. A few people in the back stood up, craning for a better look, their phones raised, red recording lights glowing like fireflies. The air buzzed with the promise of chaos. This was no longer a private family shame, but a story about to spill into the world. No one could control the narrative now. I glanced down the aisle, feeling the heat of every gaze. My heart hammered, but I was no longer afraid. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Above the crowd, I watched the phones rise, all pointed at me, and I knew, the story was no longer theirs to control. The fallout started before I even left the church. As soon as the last word left my mouth, the crowd erupted, shouts, cries, the rising hum of confusion and curiosity. Some mourners scrambled for the exits, eyes averted, as if proximity to the truth might be catching. Others crowded forward, phones outstretched, demanding answers, their faces shining with disbelief and hunger for the spectacle. My hands were still shaking when Michael appeared by my side, his coat flapping behind him, jaw set in a line of grim determination. "Come with me," he murmured, slipping an arm gently around my back. He steered me down the aisle, past pews full of frozen faces, out into the biting air. I heard the doors close behind us, the sudden quiet almost as shocking as the uproar inside. Outside, the street had transformed. News vans idled along the curb, microphones thrust like spears in our direction. Reporters jostled for position, barking questions that tangled in the cold wind. I caught bits and pieces. "Ms. Carter, where have you been? Is this a hoax? What do you have to say to your family?" Michael shielded me with his body, his hand firm at my elbow. "Don't answer," he said quietly. "Let the papers do the talking now." I barely noticed the flashing cameras, the hurried footsteps of police officers standing watch, faces impassive. My world narrowed to the sidewalk under my feet, the rapid thump of my own heart, the awareness that nothing would ever be the same again. A voice called out, tentative, uncertain. "Rachel?" I turned to see Emily, her eyes swollen from crying, her posture uncertain. She hovered at the edge of the crowd, her hands twisted in the fabric of her dress. "Please, can we talk?" Her plea caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw my sister as she was, the child who trailed me through the backyard, the girl I once trusted above all others. But that Rachel, that Emily, felt as distant as a faded photograph. The words wouldn't come. I shook my head, slow, final. "Not now," I whispered. "Not like this." Emily's face crumpled, but I forced myself to turn away, following Michael through the knot of onlookers and flashing lights. My parents were nowhere in sight, already disappeared, swallowed by the very narrative they had spun. I wondered if they felt relief or terror. Michael hustled me into his car, the warmth inside a sharp contrast to the chaos outside. "You did well," he said, starting the engine. "Better than most people could." I let out a long, shaky breath, watching my breath fog the window. "I'm not sure what I did. I just couldn't let them have the last word." He nodded, pulling into traffic. "You don't have to carry it alone. From here on, the legal process takes over. There'll be statements, hearings, probably interviews. Are you ready?" I nodded, the motion more reflex than certainty. "I have to be." We drove in silence to his office, the city sliding past in a blur of brick and glass. The whole ride, I kept thinking of Michael's words, the truth always comes with a cost. I felt the weight of it pressing down, not just the public spectacle but the private pain, the severed bonds and the stories that would never be mended. Michael's office was bright and clinical, sunlight spilling across the table where he spread out the documents. "Sign here," he said, offering a pen. "This is the reversal request. Once it's filed, you'll be legally alive again. No more ghosts." I pressed the pen to paper, my hand steady for the first time all day. It was a strange sensation, signing myself back into existence. A few strokes of ink, and the world was forced to acknowledge what I'd always known: I was real, and I wasn't going anywhere. Michael filed the paperwork, sending it off with a click. "It'll take some time, but this starts the ball rolling. We'll push for an investigation into the fraud. In the meantime, try to keep your head down. The city's already buzzing." He wasn't exaggerating. By the time I got home, my phone was full of notifications, calls from unknown numbers, emails from reporters, messages from people I barely remembered. The story was everywhere: woman returns from the dead, family accused of faking daughter's death for profit. Neighbors whispered in the hallways, some offering awkward hugs, others giving me a wide berth. The whole city wanted a piece of the story. I sat by the window, phone in hand, watching the news trucks park below, the buzz of the world swirling beyond my walls. Part of me wanted to hide, to let the frenzy pass, but another part, stronger now, was oddly calm. I had done the hardest thing already, told the truth. Emily sent another message. This time, I didn't open it. The hours blurred. I made tea, tried to eat, watched the sunset bleed across the rooftops. For the first time in years, I felt the faintest edge of hope, raw, uncertain, but real. The city outside pulsed with curiosity, impatience, gossip. Everyone wants a piece of the story now, Michael had warned. He was right. Freedom tastes bittersweet when you've lost your roots. That thought struck me as I sat in my apartment, city lights flickering through the window, a mug of tea warming my hands. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding. No more secrets, no more legal shadows. On paper and in person, I was alive, and free. But with every new sunrise came a different ache, the hollow space where family used to be. I had promised myself I'd tell the truth if the world ever asked, so when the news crews called, I agreed to the interviews. They were gentle, at first, soft lights, coffee on the table, microphones like ornaments. They wanted the story of a woman returned from the dead, but not the anger or the sorrow. I gave them facts, not blame. I only ever wanted a chance to live my own life, I told them, and left it at that. When they pushed for revenge or scandal, I shook my head. Justice belongs to the law now, I said. The rest is for time to heal. After the reporters left, the quiet felt new and strange. I wandered my apartment, touching the chipped counter, the old armchair by the window, the faded photo of Emily and me at the zoo. Every object felt heavier, freighted with memory. Sam texted that afternoon, asking if I wanted to meet at the little cafe down the street, the one we used to sneak pastries from as teenagers. I hesitated, then said yes. He was already there when I arrived, a nervous grin on his face, 2 mugs of coffee waiting. The cafe was busy, students and old men playing chess, a dog sleeping by the radiator. Sam stood as I approached, pulling me into an awkward, fierce hug. "You really are back," he said, voice thick. For a while, I thought maybe they were right. "I know," I said quietly, sinking into the seat across from him. We talked about everything and nothing. He shared stories about his job, about his kids I'd never met, about the neighborhood changing, rents rising, the old bakery turning into a yoga studio. We laughed at small things, a memory of Halloween costumes gone wrong, Emily's obsession with jigsaw puzzles, my mother's love for lemon cake that never quite set right. In a pause, Sam turned serious. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" he asked, eyes searching mine. I stared into my coffee, the swirl of cream and dark, the way steam curled in the late light. "I don't know. Maybe someday. Maybe never. Sometimes forgiving is just letting go enough to breathe again." He nodded, silent. There was comfort in not having the answers, in knowing I didn't have to pretend anymore. Michael called later, his tone businesslike but with a hint of pride. "The paperwork's done," he said. "Charges are being filed. You're officially alive in every database that matters." He hesitated. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but you made it through. Few people could." I thanked him, feeling gratitude and sorrow mix in equal measure. He'd become more than a lawyer. In some ways, he was the bridge between the old world and the new. As the day faded, I walked through the city, letting the rhythm of traffic and voices carry me along. People hurried past, wrapped in their own stories, unbothered by mine. The city was bright and unsentimental, a place to start over if you had the nerve. I took comfort in its anonymity, its wide avenues and forgiving shadows. I wasn't sure why, but as dusk settled, I found myself standing outside the old family house on Hawthorne Street. The for sale sign creaked in the wind, the windows dark and empty. I hesitated, heart thudding, then slipped the spare key from my pocket, a habit from another life. The door opened with a familiar groan. The house smelled of dust and faint lemon polish, traces of a home that once rang with laughter and song. I wandered from room to room, the kitchen where I'd baked cookies with Mom, the living room where Emily and I built forts from couch cushions, the hallway lined with faded photos. Every wall echoed with voices, old and urgent, but the rooms were silent now. In the kitchen, I paused, closing my eyes. I could see my younger self, flour-dusted, giggling as my mother scolded me for stealing cookie dough. For a moment, the warmth of that memory filled the emptiness, and I let myself miss her, miss them all, just for a breath. But memories aren't enough to build a life. I knew that now. Some houses, some stories, aren't meant to be reclaimed. With one last look, I locked the door and slipped the key into the mailbox for whoever would need it next. Outside, the street was quiet. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the cool night, letting the weight of goodbye settle and then lift. I was untethered, uncertain, but freer than I'd ever been. I closed the door behind me for the last time, stepping into whatever future waited, with hope, a small, stubborn hope, that somewhere, somehow, I would find a new way home. My story didn't end at the funeral, it began there. That's the truth I carry now, like a stone in my pocket. You can survive being erased if you refuse to disappear. The first spring after everything broke open arrived in Boston with a rush of daffodils and warm rain, the city shedding its gray skin for something brighter, softer. It felt almost like a miracle, each morning, the air sweeter, the days longer, possibility blooming in every corner. I moved into a small, sunlit apartment overlooking the park. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and each box I unpacked felt like an act of faith. The windows let in birdsong and the scent of budding trees, the radiator clanged at night, the floors creaked in the places that told me I belonged. For the first time, I decorated with my own choices, no family photos, just postcards, a stack of books by the bed, a cheerful blue teapot on the stove. I threw myself into the rhythm of beginning again. I applied for jobs, one after another, typing cover letters at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee and a playlist of old jazz to keep me company. There were rejections, and then finally, a promising interview at a local nonprofit. I ironed my best shirt and practiced my answers in the bathroom mirror, trying to see myself as someone worth the chance. Between interviews and paperwork, I met with Michael for the last time in his office. He was all business, but when he handed me the final forms to sign, my legal resurrection complete, he grinned. "You did it, Rachel. Welcome back to the land of the living." I smiled, genuine and grateful. "Thank you, Michael. For believing I was real, even when no one else did." He shrugged, gathering up my files. "You were always real. Some stories just take a while to be heard." That afternoon, I wrote myself a letter, my own kind of proof of life. I wrote about loss and survival, hope and disappointment, the slow healing that comes from naming your scars and still choosing to walk forward. I tucked the letter in my journal, a reminder that I was the author now. Sam called before he moved out of state for a new job. "Take care of yourself, Rach," he said. "We've both earned a new beginning." "I will," I promised, meaning every word. As the weeks passed, I let myself make new connections. A neighbor invited me for coffee, I accepted. A group in the park welcomed me into their pickup volleyball game. Little by little, I let the city draw me in, its parks and markets, bookshops and bakeries. Not as a ghost, not as a secret, but as myself. Some days were harder than others. There were mornings when old sadness curled around my heart, or a familiar scent in the grocery store sent me reeling back to childhood. But each time, I reminded myself, the past may shape me, but it doesn't own me. I never heard from my parents again. Emily sent one letter, long and rambling, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I realized that forgiveness, if it ever came, would be a slow process, something private, unfolding in its own time. Instead, I poured my energy into the life I was building. I joined a book club at the library, found a favorite coffee shop on Beacon Street, learned to bake my own lemon cake, always a little uneven, but good enough for friends. I sat in the park on bright afternoons, watching dogs chase pigeons, sunlight sparkling off the river. One evening, after a day of interviews and errands, I found myself standing on a bridge as the sun set over the Charles. The water glowed gold and pink, the city humming behind me, the air warm with promise. I leaned on the railing, letting the breeze brush my face, and felt something deep inside unclench. I thought about all I had lost: family, history, the illusion of safety. But I also thought about what I'd gained: freedom, honesty, the stubborn courage to choose my own future. I remembered the vow I'd made in the darkest days: I won't let them define my life anymore, and for the first time it felt true. I breathed in, slow and steady, and let go of the anger, the grief, the old need for answers that might never come. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer dictated where I was going. As the sky faded to indigo, I walked across the bridge, the city opening up before me. For the first time, I felt entirely, fiercely alive. Looking back on my journey, I realized that true freedom comes when we let go of the pain others cause and start choosing kindness, for ourselves and for those around us. Family, like life, can be unpredictable and fragile, but the power of forgiveness and understanding can help us heal even the deepest wounds. If we remember to listen, to reach out, and to hold space for love, no one truly has to walk alone. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own family, I invite you to share your thoughts or experiences. Sometimes a simple conversation is all it takes to bring a little more warmth into the world.